Hello, my name is Brad Bodnerchuk, and welcome to the Half a Dozen Hospitality Podcast, where we discuss everything hospitality, from the food on the plate to the teams that make it happen and the community that drives this industry forward. On this podcast, we sit down and chat with some of the most exciting, inspiring, and innovative minds that make up one of the most dynamic industries that there is today. And today, I have the pleasure of being joined by none other than Jed Grieve. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, Brad.
This is round 3. We've had a little bit of a hiccup with the first 2, but we're here to do it right this time. For those of you that are unfamiliar with who Jed is, go back in the history of the podcast and you can listen to him and his lifelong friend Ned Bell as they join me on the show right here, downtown Vancouver at Cook Culture, which is Ned's business. We're sitting in, for lack of a better term, like the test kitchen.
Yep.
Is that what you guys call it?
Our teaching kitchen.
Teaching kitchen, amazing, which is a great space. If you are local, come in and check it out. It's a fantastic, fantastic room and a great business on the corner of Howe and Hastings. Amazing. Yeah. So it is not often that we have repeat guests, but when it happens, there's obviously a reason for it. There's a motivation for it. And if I can kind of preface this, and feel free to interject here, Jed.
Yeah.
Jed and I have stayed in contact here and there from when we sat down last and did the podcast, and Jed took it upon himself to reach out to me with something he feels very passionately about, and he feels like him and I are aligned on, and I feel he's accurate with that. And I'm going to turn it over to him here in just a moment. But he was so, I guess, passionate about it and so motivated by it. He thought, you know what about us sitting down and not only chatting about this, but chatting about it on the record, on the podcast, and see if we can't get some traction with questions that you and I have that need to be answered, but also some theories and stories that we want to share as well. Obviously, we have some commonalities in regards to both being fathers, both being entrepreneurs, but there's more to it than that. Mm-hmm. So I'll pass it over to you in regards to the motivations for sitting down again on the podcast, bringing you and I together and to discuss the topics that you want to discuss and bring some more light to.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brad. So yeah, it was interesting, when I was going through the thought pattern and thought process of what we do at Cook Culture and the teaching aspect, and then the hospitality aspect that you come at it from. That's a little bit different than what we do, but associated, it's all around the world of food. And I think deeply and a lot about what we teach, how we teach, how people are influenced on what they eat, and then the larger kind of macro issues around what we consume, how we live, the amount of what type of food that we're eating, and how it's affecting us. And from a hospitality aspect, it's a rapidly changing world. When we look at the things like the Beyond Meat burger that is coming on, and has really made an impact in the conversation, at least. And then restaurants or chefs that 10 years ago thought one way, kind of staunchly, are now really expanding themselves, and their minds are being bent, and either they're being forced that way or they're making the choices themselves. And I'm having those conversations with some guys that have been fairly typically Western in their approach, are really getting excited about things in which they weren't, and then maybe it's not the pointy end of the stick anymore. I've worked with those chefs, 15 years ago that were at the pointy end of the stick, and they were really kind of yelling into the wind. Mm-hmm. And now there's a bigger movement. And so it really makes me think as we try to decide on how we teach, and what that means. I've come to clearly understand that when I question our customers, and we're very fortunate from having a very large email list, and we have deep conversations with customers all the time, and people are very forthcoming with information on how I should run the business, which is great. But I find it fascinating because a lot of time, I actually, to give you some context, I did a few months ago a very in-depth survey to our customers, where it was around the Canadian Food Guide. So the Canadian Food Guide had come out, and it had really made me think about kind of where this is going, that our federal government had made this pretty radical shift and had really pushed away any influence from large business, from dairy and from the meat producers, and had tried to put what they felt was best for Canadians forward, which, it's obvious. But, where does the rubber meet the road? So I put that out to our customers, and hey, do you know there was a change? Does that change affect you? Did the first or the revision that you grew up with, did that matter to you? Are you making choices in your life that are different than what they were? And it was really interesting when I asked the questions around, do you think that this affects Canadians, as in general, or other people? there is, quick to have the response of like, yes, this is good for them, this is good for, the general population, and it'll probably be, reduce costs in healthcare, and it'll do all these things. But then when I brought it back to, how does this affect you, it was a lot less willingness to change or admit that there's issues for any individual.
Right.
So I'd say the majority of people were like, I'm good, but Canadians should do this. And I think it's easy for us to be like, oh, hey, I'm fine, everything's good in my life, and but I can see the problem in the industry, or I can see the problem in our general population, and everyone else should be doing that. And I found that really interesting, because then when we then want to put, say, more plant-based classes online, how do we approach that? And people are like, oh yeah, like, is there value in having a class without meat? And people are like, well, yes, but you need to have some, right? Or that somebody will want it, or if you were going to spend X on a class about just vegetables, and a class on Thai cooking seafood, which one is more perceived value? And it's like 95% the Thai seafood class,
right,
and not the one on even amazingly developed vegetables. People just, it's hard to see the perceived value for themselves, because I what I'm seeing in those conversations is that where people are with, when you're typically healthy on an average, is that there's no major problem today, like right now, with that individual, so why make a big change? Even though we need to reduce the consumption of plastic, or we need to reduce or improve something, or reduce something in general as us as Canadians, the individual kind of conversation is more prickly.
Right.
And I find that part really interesting from the perspective of like, okay, well, we're teaching quite a lot of typical Western classes. We teach pizza and pasta, and one of our most popular classes is Spanish tapas and paella.
Okay.
It's deep fried and quite a lot of meat, and it's a pretty typically friendly Western diet done in Spanish.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And like it's not that healthy. It's tasty and it's fun for a crowd, but that's again those kind of thought patterns like, why when we're going to have fun with friends or family, or have kids parties, or do things that are fun around food, why is that food crappy? Like, and if we were like, here, we're going to give you a cooking class on how to have a really healthy kids party, we wouldn't sell it. I can guarantee you we wouldn't sell it. Right? It just
I don't know.
It's just like, we talk about.
I mean, you know, because you're in it. But sorry, I'm a little high there. I just feel like, do it. Oh, there needs to be ignorance.
Sure.
Do you know what I mean? And I get.
We've done that, and we do that. We have a class that we teach called Cooking with Foods to Fight Cancer, and it came along in a really interesting way. We had an oncologist who is a senior oncologist in Victoria at Victoria General. He came to Victoria from Toronto, and he started taking cooking classes with us because he didn't really cook much himself. He bought a bunch of kitchen gear from us, quiet guy. And then one day he introduced himself to me and said, this is who I am and this is what I do. I've got two friends of mine at the University of Montreal who just wrote this book, Cooking with Foods that Fight Cancer. He's like, I don't have any resource in Victoria to send my patients to go and learn how to cook. Can you please put this class on, or build me a class around this, and I will send you all the customers you need. Right. I was like, sure, man.
Yeah.
No problem.
Deal.
Deal.
Yeah.
So, and it's been tremendous, and it's very much on point, how to reduce inflammation, how to, really around how to fight off and prevent cancer. It's a preventative class and not so much a reactionary class.
Yeah.
He sends people on a reactionary mean because he's dealing with people with cancer.
Right.
But it's really developed around that. And we pioneered it, and we continue to push it, but it's, compared with the Spanish tapas and paellas,
right,
we sell it like 1/5 as well.
Yeah.
Right? It's not our top selling class by a long shot.
But I think that's kind of your, and I don't mean to put any pressure on you and your team, but I feel like that's your duty right now.
Sure, absolutely. That's why I want to figure out the right way to get there.
And just like it's my duty to create platforms like this for people like you to come on, and others like you to come on and tell their story and just put it out there.
Yep.
But I feel like as I'm listening to you speak, it reminds me of a video, and I forget the name of it, but I'll put it in the show notes. And you and I have talked about this before on the last podcast, I'm not sure, but it comes up often for me. And it's a video of, it's a physics video that a university put together, and it's a set of dominoes. And the last domino, I think, is over 200 pounds and 4 feet tall. And the first domino they place with tweezers.
Right.
It's that small.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
So we can sit here and talk about it's whimsical and it's whatever, but I buy into this. And what you're doing in your small four walls in Victoria with classes like this, it does affect change and it will happen. And I really do feel like we're young enough, you and I, still, that we will see this change. Conversations like this are being had. And that big, heavy domino will fall. It's just a matter of when. I mean, you mentioned the Canada Food Guide. Like, did you and I actually think in our lifetime that we would see such a dramatic change?
No, I didn't think the federal government would ever embrace that.
Because again, there's so many different variables to that, like the business side of it, like you mentioned, like big agriculture with regards to cattle farming, dairy farming, all that stuff.
Yeah. But I guess in what you're saying there, Brad, is you're right. It is our responsibility. But what I also find is that this is a very tricky road to kind of navigate, in that we all have our emotional connection with food, of where we were raised, the type of food in which we were brought up on, what we feel is kind of our right, specifically to take a holiday meal. We're going to sit down with our family at a big spread with, uncles and aunts and so on and so forth. What is expected to be there, and we have, had this experiment over a long time. My wife and I live a very certain type of lifestyle. My sister-in-law and her family more so. My parents-in-law, very much typically North American, and so we have a very mixed sort of meal at family gatherings. But it's shifted. But if you were to listen to the news or the general influence in the market, it'd be like, radically change everything right now and adopt this way, and that's the only way it needs to be because we got to save the planet and do all these things. And I see most people just like, I don't want to do that, and I don't understand how to do that, and so I'm just not going to do much. Yeah,
it's like too much too soon kind of thing. And something I was just in Toronto at the Terroir Symposium. So I'll give them a quick shout out. I don't know if you're aware of the Terroir Symposium, but Ned was there. Yeah, Ned was there. Yeah, so I saw Ned there, which was great. And I forget the gentleman's name, and I'll have to look it up. But one thing he said that really stuck with me, this is one of the last talks of the day, was he said, let's not focus on sustainability. Let's focus on thriving and abundance.
Right.
And that to me was such an interesting paradigm shift, because we hear and see sustainability so much in the marketing that's around food right now, in a lot of things that we deal with in our environment. And I mentioned this actually to a farmer yesterday, and he said, as much as he agrees with let's focus on abundance and thriving, right now we need to take this smaller step of getting things sustainable first, and then we can look at the abundance mindset and the thriving mindset. So in regards to what you're saying about it being like black and white a lot of the time when it's communicated to the population, there needs to be some gray area of like slowly dipping their feet into it. Maybe they're coming to a class at Cook Culture and they're like exposing themselves to, I didn't realize I could have a meal that is completely vegan and feel full.
Right.
Or I didn't realize I could have a Thanksgiving dinner that's vegan without having tofurkey. Right. And just have like quality vegetables that look like vegetables and eat that way. So when I mentioned it's your responsibility, or it's kind of what you are here to do, it's you have an opportunity to help educate and help be that bridge and fill in those gaps right now that exist. So I'm really happy that we're here having this conversation. But then I also look at you and your team, as probably most of our community here does, as show us. Do you know what I mean? Like be that light for us.
Yep.
But it's those little classes, it's those little things, whether you bring in Teflon or you don't bring in Teflon, or whatever it is that you do in your business, that's going to be those small like toothpick dominoes that really help us as an overall culture.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that. And I feel that all the time. It is those small incremental things that do add up to bigger change. And that's why we put a plant-based smoothie bar, as everybody can hear blenders going in the back. We have a plant-based smoothie bar here in Cook Culture, downtown Vancouver, because my wife and I just really wanted to build one. We really wanted to be surrounded around food that we nourish ourselves on all the time. And if we're going to go somewhere downtown, this is where our offices are. We eat out of the smoothie bar all the time. Sometimes I have all 3 meals of the day there if I'm here for a long stretch, and I know that I'm, appropriately nourished. And I'm not just grabbing kind of whatever and filling kind of whatever in my gut and moving on, because I don't thrive on that, when we talk about thriving. But however, that's where I want to be really careful of how, and understand, I guess, I want to put fuel on the fire, and I really want to push hard in this space, but I want to do it in a way in which people can get excited about it. if I get concerned when, when I do have those larger conversations with people that are outside of my little bubble, that, I say or push the things that I think are right. Like if I say in a newsletter, to put it in context, we have over 27,000 people in our newsletter. And so it's amazing. It's a really big tool. However, I'm talking to a very broad audience, which is really amazing. And so I'll say that and like, oh, we're going to do more classes that are plant-based. And I get a serious and direct response on that. Just like, what are you doing? How can this be? This isn't the way forward. This is not how we're supposed to do things. And, we just need to do things like this and like that. And it's just like, wow.
That's a lot of data.
There's a lot of data really, really quickly. And there's a lot of people with a lot of different opinions out there, which I've come to respect and understand that people don't want to just live the way I live, right? And that's great. And I think, I do need to build a business to a certain point that it can sustain the group that it gets. And I'm not going to be there for millions of people. I'm going to be there for the tens of thousands, and that's fine. And if I get more people that are aligned the way in which I want to run the business, then that's going to sustain the business. That's great. However, but does that could it touch into the bigger conversation, right? Like we as Canadians and North Americans typically, from the macro conversation that we're really having, is that we deal with, the largest killer in the world of North Americans, but the largest killer around the world is heart disease, right? And heart disease, predominantly, is very arguable, is completely diet related. Right, you can have small chance of genetic issues and so on and so forth, but really in generality, the big numbers are from health related, with sodium intake or the wrong sort of cholesterol or whichever. And these are things in which we can make choices every day. And this is where this starts getting into these kind of awkward conversations where, you're sitting and talking to somebody that is obviously unhealthy. You're having a conversation with them standing and they're sweating. And not to be, I don't want to judge here. That's not what I'm trying to do. It's just that this is an obvious thing that somebody is struggling in their space and in time. And now you start talking about being a vegan. Right, vegan's good for you. It's just like, dude, I'm struggling to get out of bed in the morning. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
I'm struggling.
Baby steps. Yeah.
Baby steps. I'm having a hard time taking a pee.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like that is the understanding of where the population is kind of sitting, is that talking about the average. And when we look at studies based on where the average sits, and when we talk about children and raising children and feeding children and nourishing and then educating them, we're talking about the average, and then in our lifetime, the understanding of attention deficit disorder and ADHD and how we treat that. And that, in the 80s and 90s, when it became an issue when I was a teenager, and it was treated directly with Ritalin and other drugs. And now more of an understanding and a slow understanding of like, hey, maybe this could be diet related. Maybe this isn't something to deal with pharmaceuticals, and could this be, or is my child just, that's how he is, right? Which I grew up with that. Oh, that child is that way. He
exactly.
can't pay attention, or he's a bad kid, or
and that's his story now until he's no longer here.
That's right. And he's going to be like whatever. He's going to be a garbage man, or nothing against garbage men.
No.
But that is how that's going to be for that guy.
Yeah.
And it's like that's not how it is. I know a tremendous amount of people that did have challenges. I was one of them. Like, talk about no attention in high school.
Oh my God, yeah, me too. Like the worst.
The place was a jail cell to me, right?
Exactly.
Like I didn't want to be there ever, any day, right? And however, when I got out of that space and I started being creative in my own way and figuring out how I could focus, and also then found health and found nutrition and found exercise, I can have attention span for days and days and days when I need it, right? And it's there for me. And if I'm engaged, and that is something that I've learned through progression in my lifestyle. And so understanding that we're all at different places in our life, that when we're advocating, hey, here's this change, I want to be very careful of not being seemingly elitist or cliquey. And that's where I appreciate the challenge that you're giving us, because I take it on. But before we change this next gear, I guess, and going from, now that we have the 3 locations, we're in North Vancouver, downtown Vancouver, and Victoria. We teach over 25,000 people a year or so how to cook, which I take as a responsibility. I am extraordinarily grateful that are the business that we now have in the component of our teaching, because then we also have the retail and we've got the little smoothie bar. But that is something in which it's a tool in which we can actually use to affect some sort of change or influence. And before I start doing that kind of randomly, just kind of throwing mud at the wall, which there needs to be a portion of that, I want to make sure that I have a very broad understanding of the bigger challenge, right? You know, as people, you know, you take a typical family, you know, maybe husband and wife together, young kids, you know, push from jobs and getting food on the table and what to cook and how to cook.
Paying mortgage, paying rent.
Exactly. Kids that don't like stuff and this and that and the other thing, they got to be at wherever and do different things, right? Like it's a crazy busy lifestyle. And then all of a sudden you've got somebody like me being like, oh, you should eat better and you should do this better and everything should be better and then you'll be great.
Yeah.
Right? And I have a hard time buying into that, even though it's really easy for me to say it and just be like, you know, for instance, you know, I and my wife, we focus intensively on food. Like it's like the number one biggest thing in our family.
Yeah.
And we make it a big issue with our kids all the time. But our kids are very different than their cohort. They behave differently. They eat differently. They have a much broader sense of food. But we immerse ourselves in it and we make it a big part of our life. But that's our choice in our family. It's almost like our hobby. And so, you know, it's hard for me, I understand, to say, hey, you know, if you did these things better and took these classes and ate less of this and more of that and exercised more and got out and, you know, went hiking more often, you too could do this. It's unfair, I find. And so that's where I don't feel that that's totally the right position to take, even though that I can say that personally.
Right.
Like personally, I'm like, hey, if you... And I have friends like that all the time. Like I had just the other day, a friend of mine who came to me and he wanted to buy a cookbook. He's like, you know, I love the way you guys cook at home and it's so phenomenal. I'm really excited. And he's taken the leadership on cooking at home. And he's like, give me one cookbook that's going to do it for me, right? And so, you know, Oh She Glows is a very well-known blog and she has a cookbook. And I'm like, dude, just like
do this,
right? Just make this cookbook, and this is gonna work. And you know Nick, you know, and he's stoked, and he just wants to go home and just pound into that book and do that for his family because he's a really engaged and powerful individual, right? And he's making that a focus in his family, which is tremendous. But he came to me; I wasn't pushing that down his throat.
Yeah, I feel like it's such a balance. It's not like you're sitting there and prophesizing. It's not like, I don't feel like you're on a soapbox. It's basically like if anyone wants to listen, you're here, and if anyone is interested in diving a little deeper, you're here. But I also appreciate the innate. I don't know if you get this from yourself, but almost this humbleness that you have, that you don't know everything, and you don't you and neither do I.
Yep.
And everyone in this building right now doesn't know everything. It's impossible. But can we not start having conversation and asking more questions to gain more understanding of what is better for us as a species? And obviously things look so different for you and I here in Vancouver than they would look in Nova Scotia or than they look in Antarctica or Spain or wherever it is. But I think there are fundamental things that you and I can agree on are healthy choices to make with our lives. If you have trouble getting out of bed in the morning, that should be a sign to you. I always say feather, brick, truck. Life gives you feathers, meaning like they'll tickle you. Life will tickle you, be like, hey, you should pay attention to this. If you don't listen to the feather, it'll then give you a brick upside the head, which is a little heavier, arguably, and probably a little bit more awakening for you. And then if you don't recognize and witness the brick, you're going to get a truck. And a truck is generally a terminal disease or you can't get out of bed. So it's kind of too late. So I feel like you are doing such a service to your community and abroad by getting uncomfortable a bit and pronouncing yourself a voice to be heard. And as I'm listening to you talk, and as we spoke before we turned on the mic and on the phone, I feel like a lot of this for you is exercising a bit of fear of being that guy. Like you can be that guy. Like I want you to be that guy. I want you to be that person. Do you know what I mean?
No,
and
it's interesting that you recognize that.
I feel like everyone, me included, your wife, your employees, the customers you have here, they have a voice and they have a message, and it's just about allowing for it to come out of you and you have a lot of knowledge in what you've done and what you've seen works, and people don't have to take that again as the gospel, but allow for it to at least be data that they could use. And that's the challenging piece is we can sit here, we can record a 5-hour podcast, and we can talk about what to eat, what not to eat, what to get your heart rate up to, how many days a week to do that, all of those things. Yeah. But then the challenge is the actionable piece. Like you give Nick this cookbook, which is great, and you give him all the tools, but then what? Yeah. And that's a challenge we have in our space, in our in food, is we can do all these things, we can have these classes. Yeah. But what happens when class is over and they're at home and they've worked a 12-hour day and their kids are bitching and complaining because they don't want to eat asparagus and quinoa? Yeah. You know what I mean?
Totally.
And and that's the real conversation. But again, I feel like I need to turn my microphone off and you need to step into this role of you are a resource, you are a known business in the local community, and you can and should be standing up and saying, hey, stop. Yeah. Listen, this is what needs to be done. Period. I feel like Ned does a really good job at that.
Yeah, Ned does a tremendous job. He's as an advocate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I feel like that could be what, and I don't know if this resonates with you at all in regards to kind of exercising that imposter syndrome a bit.
Well,
but
that's why I wanted to reach out to you, is that I wanted to be able to have a voice. It wanted to come out of me. So.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why can't it be you? Do you know what I mean? Like, why does someone like Rich Roll, why is he now, like, he is now looked at, as far as I'm concerned, as like one of the lead voices when it comes to the vegan diet, and he's doing these amazing retreats in Italy where he's introducing people to how you can live a vegan lifestyle, and he's just done it, but he's living proof. Like, look at this guy, how fit he is now, and what he's doing with his life, and he's literally, as far as it looks online, he's thriving, and what he shares looks like he's thriving. So I feel like, why can't that be you? I feel like you have the passion, you have the knowledge, and you have, like you said, you have such a large community, be it diverse, that you speak to, but be that, and it sounds so cliche, but cliches exist for a reason. Be the change you want to see, and I'm so proud of you for having these conversations and asking me to come here today and recording this, because I'm excited for round 2, 3, and 4. I think we should really be doing more of this. So thank you for taking that first step.
Cool. I appreciate that.
But one point I wanted to make before I turn it back over to you was, we can all agree that there are certain things, like if for you and I to go out right now and walk down the street, we can agree there's certain things that nice people do and certain things that you shouldn't do. Like being nice is like saying pardon me, or excuse me, or hello, or goodbye. Like, these are just standards.
Our core values.
Our core values. And I think the same thing exists for food, the food we consume.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I think that's what we, across the board, across the universe, we can agree that we should all be eating, like Michael Pollan said, more leafy greens, less meat. I think that is something that, it's a hill that you and I are willing to die on. But again, it's, how do we affect more change? How do we get more people to listen to that? And then the big piece is, now that they've listened, how do we help them facilitate it into their lifestyles?
Right. Big one.
That's the big challenge.
Yeah. So
can we do more of that with podcasts like this, with more cooking classes at Cook Culture? Like, how can we help people even more? But then at the same point, like you and I said before we turned on the mics, there are some people that just don't want to change.
Yeah, and that itself is difficult, and I think it comes from a place of having, like us all, when we don't evolve somehow, we all have our own restrictions and limitations, right? And sometimes it comes out from being health, wellness, how you eat, and I think it's identifying and recognizing that in your trajectory, like why, if you are someone that is maybe, you look in the mirror and you're not as healthy as you wish you were, like, where did that either go sideways or did it ever, right? Like for myself, and I try hard, and I hear what you're saying to me, but I try hard not to get too preachy. Because I was a fat kid. I was an out of shape kid. I drank way too much as a teenager and as a young adult, and I was on a really, really poor trajectory. Like, if I hadn't have gotten to a point where I was sick of myself, I wouldn't have been able to become, a healthier, much, much fitter 45-year-old man.
Right.
And that I'm very proud of myself and proud of the place that I was able to get to from the very poor and low place that I was at 25. Right? Like me at 25, whatever that was, 20 years ago, pre-2000. Yeah, I was like I weigh 160 pounds now. I was probably 210.
Yeah, see,
right?
that for me validates your story even more. And that makes you an authority on this topic because...
I guess so. It made me a fat person.
Do you know what I mean? But you've been there, you exercised it, pardon the pun, and now you're on the other side and be like, hey guys, look, like I don't want anyone to experience what I've experienced. Yeah. And this is what I've done. And then just put it out there and let people consume it as much as they want to consume it. I'm reminded of, did you ever watch the minimalism or minimalist documentary? Came out a few years ago. Just about adopting like the minimalist lifestyle.
Okay, yeah, no, I know the movement. My wife was very much associated and still is with it.
So first, this is kind of a long stretch here, but in the documentary,
the guy with the bags, the grocery bags, he was hanging them up, and that was the guy that went and they like
these are two guys
bombed a forestry place or something. Anyways, it's different podcast.
Different podcast. Yeah, these are two guys. They wrote a book on minimalism. Anyway, they were talking about money won't get you happiness and all these things, and you can't like buy happiness, which I totally agree. And this one guy was saying how he heard one of his friends say, Jim Carrey was quoted to say, riches don't bring you happiness. And this guy said, well, it's easy for Jim Carrey to say it. Right. But his friend was like, well then, but he's the only one that can say it because he's witnessing it. Yeah. And I feel like that's you. You're the Jim Carrey in this situation because you've been there. Yeah. You've now gotten to here, arguably fitter now at 45 than you were at 25, which is something to be said. And you've and this isn't all about you and your fitness. And I get that. But let's use that story as fuel to this fire that is much needed in our space, because we, as much as the Canada Food Guide changing, and as many classes as we can host at Cook Culture, people love stories like your story. Like a photo of you out of shape and kind of down and out, if you will.
Luckily it was the 90s and there aren't many pictures around.
Right. There weren't cell phones. If they were super grainy.
Yeah. And any of my friends that do have those pictures, I don't want to see them.
But there's value to that from look at it like a story, right? Yeah. That's a valuable story to be told. Yeah. And looking at Jim Carrey, what he went through, like living out of the back of his car, and now he's a multimillionaire and arguably doing what he loves. So I just feel like you have such an incredible story to tell, and you have such passion behind it, and you want to affect such positive change. Get out of your own way and make this even louder than it already is.
I was very, very fortunate, and am very fortunate, of my mom. So my mom, she immigrated to Canada in '69, and she was raised on a ranch in the Rift Valley in Kenya, and she's an African. And when she came here, she was pretty much immediately sickened by the North American lifestyle of the then 60s. Right?
Yeah, which is crazy, because you and I would think it'd be so probably radical.
Yeah, absolutely, right? And so within a few years, she had started a food co-op where she was buying organic food in bulk and sharing it with the community. She had become a potter, and she had a large propane-fired kiln that she would again share with the community, and people come in. And this was my normal growing up. My mom was very much an embraced hippie. It was a strange sort of life in the sense that my father, he was a socialist, but he was a capitalist at the same point in time. So he was off, very highly educated, very capable, a high earner. So we had everything that I needed as a child. I never went without, but I didn't have shoes, right? We ate on pillows with chopsticks on the floor, and we didn't have a dining room table, right? So I grew up in a really interesting way. Every summer we would spend in the south of France, and so this kind of weird dynamic of, we lived like we lived on a Gulf island, but we really didn't, right?
Right.
And that stays with me every day. So, I understand what you're saying, and I have my history of, then becoming a teenager. My parents did divorce in the early 80s, and that kind of tore my life apart. And I then went off kind of rudderless, and, like a lot of us did in the 80s. And fortunately have come full circle, but come full circle because of that woman, right? She ingrained at me at a young age of what really matters, and seeing something that's wrong. She saw the food system when she arrived here and went to the grocery store, and she was shell-shocked. She'd never been into a grocery store like a Safeway in 1969. and she just couldn't understand how to buy food in that environment. And so she just did what she knew what to do. She found a local farmer and she bought what she needed, and she started milling her own grain and just pushing. We got all our milk from the local farm, and she turned her own butter, and because that was just her normal, right? That's what she knew. That's what she saw. They had a village of people that lived on their farm, and they all did this for them. So she observed this as a child. In Africa, you didn't do this kind of work yourself,
right?
But that was still her normal. So, I'm very uniquely fortunate for a very typical North American upbringing with this really kind of strange infusing of my mom's influence of her background, and where she really repelled the North American way of life, and we didn't have a microwave as a child, we didn't have TV dinners, we didn't have things out of a can or a jar. She just didn't do that. And so I didn't grow up with that. So as getting now to become, a parent, I've got an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old, and nourishing them, it becomes very easy for me to go to that place, right? Like it's very easy to go and shop the way in which I need to shop and spend the time, because I saw that influence. But, we then talked with our friend Ned, and, I would go and spend weekends at Ned's place. The weekend was radically different at Ned's house, right? It just didn't. His mom just the cooking wasn't how it was, and Barry was a typical 80s dad, and that's just how it was. And we ate a lot of kind of processed and prepackaged food, and we went down to the corner store as often as we could. And so, that's how that typical kind of North American trajectory is. So I also, I guess what I'm saying is that I appreciate that when we talk about, oh, hey, you should eat better, you should do this, you should do that, there's a lack of understanding and knowledge, where I feel extraordinarily fortunate that I got this foundation as a very young child, and now I can lean on that just the feelings of that also, I make my own bread, and the way in which I bake my own bread. My mom taught me to bake bread as a young child, right? She also, like I said, she had a pottery studio, and I would work with clay, and it's very similar to making bread, and the patience and the time of all of that. And when we don't have that, when I've seen my friends that are missing those ingredients of youth, of getting the understanding of food at a young age, I can see how incredibly difficult that is at 35 or 40 to be like, oh yeah, now I'm going to start living this lifestyle, right? It's like all of a sudden, hey, speak French. Just no, speak French now. You need to be speaking French like tomorrow, or you're going to be in a bad place, right? Yeah. It's like, how do I even start? I
think that is part of it as well. Is can we through platforms like this and through cook culture and other ways, can we just give people little seeds of just small steps? And it's like anything else. It's like fitness in itself. Right. For those of you that aren't local, the gross grind is a very daunting task for people, or a CrossFit class is very daunting for people. But maybe just go for run 5 minutes, walk 5 minutes. Right?
Don't start with the gross grind.
Don't start with the gross grind. Reasonable expectations of yourself, but also challenging yourself as well is hyper. For me, is hyper important. I love this quote, and my dad hates it. It's people wish to be settled, but only so much as they are unsettled is there any hope for them. Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I love that, because for me it's did I get uncomfortable today? How did I get uncomfortable? Did I have uncomfortable conversations? Did I sweat? Did I try and pick something up that was too heavy for me to pick up? Was I challenged as a father or as a partner? I want that, because again, that is innate in me, and how I was raised by my mother is things are going to get difficult, and that's okay. But so much of, and this is a broad stroking statement, so much as our society is so comfortable and it's so easy, and making your own bread and churning your own butter, a lot of people will say, sorry, Jed, I don't have time for that.
For sure.
Do you know what I mean? But what can we be doing, and what can you be doing with your resources and your knowledge to go, okay, you can't make your own bread, but you can do this. Or you can't churn your own butter, but you can do this. And I feel like that's where the real value is in allowing for at least our local community here to help them move forward.
Well, I hope so. To me, it comes down to that fine line, like I've been trying to in this whole conversation, is taking that stance of being okay, if you want to live a better life, you need to work for that better life.
Yes.
I can try to be as gentle as I can, because the real message that I have for you is you've got to get up off the couch, and you've got to do this, and you've got to work hard, and you've got to put focus, and you've got to stop eating shit, and you've got to stop doing, and embrace all these things that you really may not love at first. And it's really, really, really hard. And nobody really wants to hear that from me, right? They're like, oh, hey, fit guy, yeah, everything's so easy for you, right? Like, I have friends of mine all the time and see my Instagram posts that have, is always the best of your days.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? And
yeah.
they're like, oh, your life's so grand for you all the time. And it's like,
it is. Well, it is.
Yeah, no, it is.
And it's okay. Sorry to interrupt. It's okay to own that as well. Like your life is. I mean, you have your issues, just like I have my issues.
Sure.
Just like that guy walked by, he has his issues. But you're living a pretty awesome life.
I live an amazing life,
and that is okay.
Yeah.
And people can be challenged by that, and that is okay too.
Yeah, but I don't want that to. I really, really, really don't want to turn that somebody off. I don't want them to be like, hey, who are you to tell me that?
True.
Right? It's like, I love what I get to do. I'm fitter and faster now. I marathon and I do ultra marathons, and I'm faster now than I was in my entire career because I keep getting better at certain things in my life. I'm tweaking and figuring out and pushing and striving to improve things all the time. And the results are, my biggest one is when I challenged myself in a race. I did the BMO last weekend, and I was within 30 seconds of my best time ever, and I had the best recovery and the best split that I'd ever had, right? And so when I look at myself in the mirror, that's how I judge myself.
Right.
I don't care how anybody else looks at that, because nobody else cares about my time or what
Doesn't
I did.
matter, yeah.
Nobody cares about my split, except my coach.
Yeah.
Right? But I do, right? Because that was my proof that what I'm doing in my day incrementally is better than what I was doing a year ago or a year before that, where I was really struggling with certain things. Or I had, BMO last year, I didn't even finish.
Right.
I got to second beach and I was out, right? I was just having such a crappy day because I just hadn't led up to it correctly. I just done some things wrong, and it was obvious once I DNF'd. But, DNFing marathon sucks, especially when you're at 30K mark. It's really not fun.
Do you golf?
No, I do not golf.
The reason I ask is, and this may have came up, it comes up a lot for me, and for me, it's a really poignant and tangible analogy. So hearing you say something like, they don't want to hear it from me because I'm their fit friend who posts like salads and me hiking. But at one point, you'll be the golf shot, which means I'm not a good golfer, but I enjoy a round of golf here and there.
Yep.
And 90 of my 92 strokes are terrible, but there's two or there's one that just like, that's what brings me back.
Yep.
It's pure, it sounds good, it goes where I want it to go. But if I allowed for those 90 other strokes to define whether or not I'm going to go play golf again, I would never go play golf. But it's that one shot that keeps me going back, or at least entertaining. I can
relate to that in baseball.
Yeah, exactly. In baseball, so same thing, right? Yeah. It's that one you hit on the right spot on the bat,
and it could be like once a season even.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah. So I feel like Nick reaching out to you and saying like, "Hey man, like, can you recommend a book? Like that's your golf shot, or that's your double, whatever it is." Right. It can't be everyone all the time is going to say yes, Jed, please, Jed, help me, Jed. Yeah. But that I just feel like again that is your challenge is you will be challenged by people saying like, man, it's easy for you. You're Jed. You own Cook Culture. Like, dude, you have a smoothie bar. I don't have a smoothie bar at my work. Like, of course you can be healthy. Yeah. But be like, but I had to do a lot of things to get to this point. Yeah. But that's not even it. It's about continuing, pushing and educating and being that voice and having conversations like this because there are so many challenges that you will face of like, I don't want to be that guy and I don't want to be pushy, but that's what you're here to do. You're here to be that voice, and you're here to have conversations like this and be like, hey Brad, you know what? I think it's important that you and I sit down and talk about this and talk about it again and talk about it again and again and again and again.
But I guess in that, and I appreciate that, and I thank you for it because it's encouraging. But like in that direction, like, let's say that somebody is like, hey, I either just want to eat healthier, I want to lose some weight, that a large one, and losing weight, you can look at that in a few different aspects of how to accomplish that goal. And if our conversation, in this forum was to help people, where do you think that conversation, where do you think the best place for that is to be? Is that to have a conversation around nutrition? Is that about mindset? Is that about physical activity that we can do? Is that a bit of everything? Is that like, how do we use the best use of our time? Because that's a massive one that I hear all the time. In that survey that I was talking about, the biggest single question was time. And I have this thing in my mind that I push into my kids all the time when my kids tell me, oh, I didn't have time for that. I'm like, you didn't make the time for that.
It's a choice.
It's a choice. I saw you on your tablet for 2 or 3 minutes this morning, and now you're telling me you didn't brush your hair. Right? Like, you don't leave the house without your hairbrush. That's just, you're going to look a certain way. That's how we do it in our family, and that's how it is, right? You need to respect yourself. And you tell me you didn't make the time.
Yeah.
You don't have the time, right? You want me to get you up out of bed earlier?
Yeah.
Right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Right? No. Okay,
Yeah.
well, then you need to make the time and prioritize. And is that what that conversation needs to be?
I think it's everything. It has to be, and I hate using the term because I feel like it's such a hot button right now, or it's overused almost. Like, it has to be a holistic approach. It really has to be. It is mindset. It is meditation. It is diet. It is exercise. It is community. It is education. I think it's things like and we should put it on the show. I'll put it in the show notes.
Yep.
Give me the top 10 books you think people should read.
Right.
For fitness, for diet, and for mindset. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
Like, that for me is because again, we're establishing you right now. I'm making it official as a resource for all of this.
Yep.
So people will be like, okay, Jed seems to have his shit together, right? So why not do what Jed does? Why not try and eat what Jed eats in a day? Something like that. Like, this to me is like, it's giving people little things they can be doing to improve or adapt, change their current existence. So I don't think it is one thing. It is not drink kale smoothies. I don't think it is one thing, read this book. I don't think it is one thing, spend 5 minutes sitting alone quietly meditating. I think it needs to be everything, so it becomes, as you know, a lifestyle. Your lifestyle now looks a lot different than it did when it was 25. And there isn't one thing that you're doing. Right? No. It's a culmination of many things.
I keep working on the big things, and then once I get rid of that big thing, then the next smallest thing becomes the next big thing, and
exactly.
I just kind of keep going down the list.
Exactly, but I think that's the daunting piece for a lot of people is, and there's a lot of people doing this right now. They're trying to make it consumable, and I pardon the pun, but like if we sat down here and there was a massive these tables were full of vegetables, and I said you have to eat all these vegetables by the end of the week, we'd be like, man, where do we start?
Well, I got blender over. That's where we'd start.
We'll just blend it up. But do you know what I mean? It can be daunting for a lot of people. So let's break it down. Okay, like we've got greens here, and we've got root vegetables here, and like what's going to allow us whatever.
Of course.
And I think that's where, again, you come in and be like, hey guys, actually, you know what? I know all these vegetables, and I know how they're going to impact you positively, negatively. Let's talk about how we can break this down into bite size, again, pardon the pun, pieces. For me, I feel like that is our way forward in anything. If someone came to you and was like, hey, I want to open up my own version of a cook culture, one of your staff, they're like, hey, I want to open up in Chicago. How do I do it? You wouldn't be like, oh, you just do this. It'd be like step by step.
Here's 1,001 things you got to do.
Exactly. So as tiring as that is, and you're busy enough as you are, I feel like it is now on you to find a way to make this happen for our local community and then abroad as well.
The other thing that I want to make sure that we continue a conversation around is how we're nourishing children.
Yes.
And that's something that I find really fascinating right now. And this is a very, very touchy subject I've come to find. We have, again, a finite amount of time, and then what we feed our kids, and we look at things like hot lunch program and what those are made of and what those do for children. And then when kids get to an age where they can make their own decisions at school and spend their own money, and I have this really bizarre, crazy experiment going on right now that's been going on for now 11 and 8 years, where I made a decision to nourish these two in a certain way and be relentless and very rigorous about how I nourish them and what I'll expect from them. And they know that I'm incredibly strict when it comes to food. I'm very, very non-strict or less strict when it comes to many, many other things. And I allow them a lot of freedoms, and I want them to fail hard and fall on their face and hurt themselves in a lot of ways, but where I give them very little wiggle room when it comes to diet, right? Like I'm not going to allow them any space in their life to go and experiment for a certain amount of time eating food that they shouldn't be eating for them to perform at their very, very best.
Right.
And I try never to say this in a way to again feel elitist or brag, but my children are extraordinarily healthy. They sit at the top of each of their own classes. They have brilliant minds. They get completely straight A's across the board on every single subject, from physical education to creative to especially STEM for my daughter and my son in his language arts. They have incredible attention spans. They are energetic and ready to go all the time. My son is a phenom when it comes to running and mountain hiking. My daughter is incredibly strong when it comes to her sports with rock climbing and gymnastics. And they go and go and go. And of course they burn out and they have their time, they have the downtimes, that sort of thing. But they are just going constantly, and it's the fuel that goes into them. Right? And and I love them incredibly, and we embrace them and we play with them and we struggle with them and we have all these great times. But I get obsessive over what I feed them and the time that I put into specifically feeding them, and how I put the amount of time into making their lunch and how I pack their lunch and then what they're going to have for dinner and how their breakfasts are and how much they have of one thing and not enough of another. And I take this on, as I said, as an experiment. I've been really fascinated to see how they would do, and I really try not to mentally compare them to other kids. However, you observe how things go on in classrooms and in different environments, especially at things like I talked about with kids' parties and where they're eating kid food and so on and so forth, and the direct correlation of behavior, attention span, and so on and so forth after that. And that's, however, you really what you're getting down to is judging parents on what they're feeding their kids.
Yeah,
and this is
which is so dangerous.
It's super dangerous, right? Nobody wants to be told, and that's, again, like a Nick and Susan, who are friends of Brad and mine. Where Nick's a wonderfully open guy, and he's just like, man, I want this for my family. This is what I want, right? And he's, again, when we were going through the cookbook with Nick the other day, he had his boy there, and he's showing his boy. He's like, would you eat this? Would you eat that? And his boy, I don't like that. I don't like that. And then, and he's, I can tell he's going to go home and put the effort and energy that it's going to take for his kids to figure out what they like and what they don't like. My daughter has a problem with mushrooms. My son loves tomatoes. My daughter doesn't. They eat amazing food all the time, but they have the things that they do and don't like, and that's how it's going to be. And we live a plant-based lifestyle. We eat very, very little cheese. We eat very little wheat, especially processed wheat. We eat a very, very clean lifestyle that is full of vegetables, legumes, pulses, and fruit. And seeing the direct response. Like, if I didn't see such an amazing response from them, and that they didn't come from the most brilliant guy. So it's not like I'm a rocket scientist as my kids are going to be rocket scientists.
Yeah, it's a passion thing.
Yeah, right? Yeah. I didn't get the grades that they got, right? And especially at my daughter's age of 11 when my parents divorced. My report cards from that point forward were atrocious, right? They weren't even worth the paper they were printed on. And where they're setting themselves up to, of where from the focus on food, forget everything else that we do in the family unit, but the food that I put into them that allows them to be able to behave the way that is effective for their learning, right? And in that, isolating that. Aside from the relationships and interpersonal things that they have, that is a bit separate. Like, you're going to have that energy also. Yeah. I feel like I have lots of energy to love my wife because I love her so much, and I feel empowered with that all the time, and that comes from the food that we share together, right? And energy that we have together. But my children, really that focus on every single meal. Every breakfast, every lunch, every dinner, and never being like, oh, well, we ate the one thing, or hey, I need to do this one day, this 1 week. It's an every day, every meal.
It's a lifestyle.
It's a lifestyle. You never stop it.
Yeah.
And that I guess where why I kind of bang on about it is that I find that one fascinating because it's our next generation. Yeah. You and I are responsible for ourselves. We need to make whatever choices going forward, and we're going to be what we're going to be with our history. We and a lot of the age group that we associate with, we have small kids, and we have to do everything that we possibly can to prepare these guys for that next generation. And that has a lot to do with these bigger conversations of like, hey, we're making choices for the planet, we're making choices that are ethical. Why are we making the choices? For that next generation.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
And if we don't make good choices for ourselves today, we're not going to be positioning ourselves correctly for our kids or our friends' kids, right? Or our nieces or our nephews or our grandchildren or whatever. And that's something I guess I get more fired up on, and that I want us to make sure that we are really putting that effort towards it, and that us, our individual selves, of when we're like, I'm tired today, or I didn't get to the grocery store, or that's all that I have, and you're having cereal for dinner, like, you failed. right? Like
Yeah.
you just kind of did, and just to embrace it and understand it and move past it. But let's incrementally get better going forward,
Yeah.
right? Because like, I'm not saying that I've never fed my kids cereal for dinner,
Yeah.
right? Like
There's no such thing as perfect.
no, absolutely, right?
But you know what, that one for me is, and I feel like we could do a whole podcast on that discrepancy that we face. On the discrepancy we face right now in not only just globally but in our city. I've been exposed to a lot of the gaps that exist in healthy food and affordability, and families that literally can't, like, for you and I to sit here and say, hey man, you know what, you should go jog. That's easy because that's free.
Yeah.
But for you and I to sit here and say you should feed your family organic vegetables, fruits and vegetables, that's really difficult for a lot of people. And
especially the organic question.
Yeah, exactly. So through my charity dinner series that we're doing, which we are actually donating all of our profits to, if I can just humble brag here for a second, the dinner series that we're doing is associated with local food-based charities, and the profits go to those charities. But it's only putting like a small dent in the issues that we face in our city, in parents that they literally struggle to put food on the table to feed their kids. So that one is just so challenging. Like, how do we convey that message, and how are we sensitive to the realities that everyone, like, we're two white guys. Do you know what I mean? Like, and again, it's not easy for us, but it's easy for us.
We need to make sure that we make that a priority, though. There are some tremendous organizations in the city that are doing excellent work. We align ourselves with Growing Chefs. So
Growing Chefs is someone I volunteer with as well. They're amazing.
They're absolutely amazing. And, we do everything we can to get them the resources that they need to do what they do. And that, I appreciate, and in a lot of ways, I'm not speaking to a single mom who's struggling just to pay the rent, right? I am speaking to a lot of us in Vancouver that are affluent enough to make some small changes and choices. But I totally appreciate and understand what you're saying, is that there is a large segment of the population in which this conversation just is irrelevant. Right. Like, unfortunately. And so, my position on that is that there are already tremendous and an abundance of tremendous organizations that are doing excellent work. And when we do think about having that extra $5 or $10 or whatever, where can we put that? Let's focus on local and local to home. It's a funny thing, but there's so many people that contact us for, hey, donate money to this and donate money to that outside of our local community. There is so much that our own local community does need and that we can do locally. So Cook Culture and myself personally have been focused on local community events for bringing food and knowledge specifically to less privileged, and Growing Chefs, and Project Chef is another tremendous one. Barb over at Project Chef, that from aligning with what we do, of course, with our chefs that get into the schools and teach kids about food.
We really can't emphasize enough how important it is, to your point about setting our children up and their peers for success, and giving them all the tools that they need, and taking that extra time in our day to make sure that the lunches that we're preparing or the food that we're giving them is nutritious and as healthy as it can be. But again, being sensitive that to everyone that listens to this podcast, that may not be their reality right now.
No, and absolutely. And I hope at least they can find the things that we talk about interesting to a point, even if they may not action on it. And it's funny, I've had a business mentor for a lot of my career. He's an amazing man, and I appreciate everything that he's ever given to me in knowledge. And there's been times where he said things, really quite thoughtful and brilliant things that have just kind of gone in one ear and out the other, right? Because I'm not ready for that yet. I'm just not prepared for that information that he's passing on. And then at some point in time later, that little tiny niggle of memory will come, and I'll phone him up and I'll be like, remember when we were talking about that thing and you were saying, and he's like, oh, and he just, recites the entire thing again. I'm like, right, that's what I'm doing to do right now.
You just the journey, the path that you were on wasn't, you weren't ready for it.
I wasn't ready for it, but it stuck with me. I heard it and it made sense, but I couldn't use it, so I just filed it. And so hopefully maybe there's some of that for people, is that, if they find what we're talking about interesting, and it may not be prepared for that in their lifestyle or really understanding, and there's other issues at play, slowly we can get there.
Definitely. Is there anything else you feel like you wanted to, for lack of a better term, exercise today or get off your chest today on our kind of inaugural of what I'm hoping to be more and more conversations around these topics?
Yeah, I guess where I want to go from this point forward is hearing from some of your listeners around some questions, because I'm very excited and want to understand where people outside of this two-person conversation are. And, I am going to and very willing to put some time and energy and research, and fortunately have the facilities to, with some of the help of the staff, to answer some questions, So if you have any listeners that are like, hey, I have been, contemplating being keto, but keto doesn't really make a lot of sense to me because I don't want to also eat red meat, and so it seems that vegan keto doesn't make any sense, and it's not nutritious, and blah blah blah. Like, if there's those kind of really kind of weird complex questions on that, let us know. We have a tremendous amount of resource with our chefs and then with associates, and can answer maybe some technical questions. I would be fascinated to find out those, because I do not have all the answers, but fortunately have pathways to a lot of those answers. So, it'd be great if yourself and some of your listeners could get to you and be like, hey, that was, interesting. I want to know X, Y, and Z. Give them to me, and then we can get back together and let's answer some of them.
Yeah, amazing. I really do appreciate, again, you taking the initiative to reach out to me and ask for this opportunity. I was more than happy to provide it for you, and I appreciate you as a person and what you're doing, not only professionally in the community, but also with your family as well, and very responsible of you. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for starting to wiggle out of that imposter syndrome that you have a bit, but again, I feel like you can be and should be a resource for a lot of people, not only locally but globally. So let's do whatever we can to allow for your message to be heard by as many people as possible. If people do want to reach out and they want to engage with you or with Cook Culture, how best they do that?
Well, one of the easiest ways for me, my public profile on Instagram is jed.grieve, so jed.grieve. Through you, of course, and all your channels. Cook Culture on social media. So again, Cook Culture on Instagram and Facebook. Those are probably the best mediums. I post a lot of what I'm doing with my own family on Instagram, and share a lot of my kind of personal life. And then we also have the Cook Culture account that is all kind of the business side of things. Or come into the store. I'm around the House Street store all the time. I love to meet people and have these conversations. Yeah,
if you guys are local, please do come in, say hi to Jed and his team, and have a plant-based smoothie.
So we have a small little part of our business called Culture Lab. We actually started it a year ago with our friends from Bliss Cafe over in Victoria. And it was interesting. We knew kind of going into it that it was a different market. We weren't sure kind of what that was going to be. We've kind of found over the last Christmas that the type of crowd at the House Street location was different than the Victoria locations for the Bliss Cafe, and it needed to be just a different offering. So we parted ways with them, and we rebranded it called Culture Lab. So thankful to Bliss and Joe and Heather Cunliffe, who own Bliss, and how amazing they are and everything they gave to us to get us up off our feet. And so Culture Lab is quite a tight menu. Very much on point, all plant-based, gluten-free, organic, 100% organic, which seems to be a little bit of an oddity in the juice world. I think they really kind of make money of it independently and can't be organic, which is a bit of a compromise for us. We're very fortunate that we have it built into our facility, so we have less overhead and we can somewhat make it work with the organic offering. Because that's how my wife and I live our lifestyle. We choose organic when we can, or beyond organic when we're buying from local farmers in the summertime and that sort of thing. And so the Bliss Cafe, the Culture Lab Cafe really is an emotional thing for us. It really matters to us because it's where we're trying to put our best foot forward. And that's why we have it right up front by the front door there. You can come in, get a smoothie, get a treat, we do some fantastic lunch offerings, and then kind of get a sense of how the whole story works with the teaching facility and the retail. And in North Vancouver and Victoria, it's the teaching facility and retail in one.
Amazing. Thank you guys for tuning in as you do week after week. I truly appreciate and love all of you. Your support means the world. Thank you guys for allowing for Jed to come back on the show and share his stories and his passions. Stay tuned for more content from Jed and myself. There are numerous avenues we can go down with the topics that we've covered, and again, please do get engaged, ask questions, engage with me online, or please reach out to Jed as well. Again, he is a resource. He has been down these paths, and not only does he know a lot, but he wants to learn a lot. So please engage with him, ask questions, and if we don't know the answer, we'll do our best to find out.
Absolutely will.
And to all of you that are out there making efforts right now, feeding your kids healthy food, exercising, keeping yourself and your community fit, thank you guys for so much for working, because as we said earlier, it's a choice. So
Absolutely.
thank you for making that choice. Again, support cook culture if you are local. If you or anyone else if you enjoyed this podcast, anyone else you think may enjoy it, please share it with them and subscribe as well. Have an amazing day. Until next time, be good and do good. That's it. We did it. Thanks, man.
Thanks, buddy.